Hello guys, welcome to Online Web Tutor presented by PHP Frameworks team. I am Sanjay. We are learning REST API development in PHP using JWT. This is our part number 17. Inside this video session guys, we will see about login API method. In the last video, we had seen about detailed concept of JWT and its architecture. We had discussed about complete details of about header, payload and the signature. Now inside this video, we are going to make our login API method. After successful login, we will make JWT token with our user details. So back to code editor. Now this is our class. Inside this class, we have made some properties, some construct function and some of the methods. Now inside this, I am to define one more method to check our login. So let's say check login. Now inside this, on the behalf of our email address and password, we will check that that user exists in our database or not. So if I open Chrome browser, inside this Chrome, if we open our database, so localhost phpMyAdmin, username password, database name password. So this is something REST PHP API. Now inside here, we have a table called tb_users, and also we have to open our app. So go to apps and Postman. Inside this, we will check and run about login API. So back to our code editor. Now if we open up our check email method, because inside this method we developed inside previous video, which basically checking about existence of email address details inside our table. So if I copy all the code of this method and paste inside this block, but this time we are going to check about not only for the email address, we are going to also check with the password. So here it should be placeholder. And the next parameter we have to bind as a string, and this should be something this password. And finally we need to execute that. If we find any details with the email address and the password, it will return the result, otherwise we will get an empty array. So save all these changes, back to our v1 directory, and inside this v1 I'm going to create a file, and let's say login user, or let's say simply login API.php. Now inside this, firstly we need to declare our headers. So let's say header, this should be something, let's say access, control, allow origin, and this should be from all. If I again copy and paste, this should be allow methods, and inside this we are going to use called the post methods, so it should be post, and the third header for the content type, so let's say content type, it should be application JSON, and cat set equal to, let's say UTF-8. Now finally we have included all the headers. So if we write one line comment here, something including headers. And finally, if we open about the file called create user API to include other stuffs, so if I copy all these things from this file and pasting inside this login API, all we have done now. After including headers, we have included about users.php for the users class and the database.php for the database connection strings. After including these two files, successfully we have made two objects and initialized about database connection inside users class. So here inside this API, as we are using post method, so let's say data equal to something JSON decode, and we need to read all the data from file get contents about from body section, so this should be PHP and input. Now let's say that if not empty, it means we have data, and inside this we have email address. So if I copy this block and pasting it here. And again I'm repeating for the password. It means password is also available inside our body parameter. Otherwise we are going to make a else block, and let's say http response code, and let's say 404 echo JSON encode, and I'm going to declare an array. Inside this, let's say that status equal to 0, and message is something that all data needed. So let's all data needed. All we have done with the else block. Now here we have some data. So if we have some data, then we are going to initialize about the properties. So user object, let's say email equal to data and email. Again copy and paste. Now this time I'm going to initialize with the password. So password and password. So successfully we have two properties now. So I'm going to call this check login method. So copy that back here, and let's say user underscore data equal to, let's say user obj. By the help of this object I am calling this user class method. Now it will return about the user data if it matches with the email address and the password. Now as we know that we are using a hashed password to save our users inside this table, so inside this API either we can convert this coming password into a hash password and match with the existing user inside database, or we are just going to simply match with the email address. After taking about the email address and fetching all the details with the user from the database, and after getting that, we are going to use one more PHP function called password underscore verify. So if I do the same thing, and again if I remove this password section from here, again as from here, and remove this password from here, because we are going to use a PHP function to verify our password. Now if we save all these changes of this file back to our login API, and now let's say that successfully here we are getting about all user data. So if I scroll down, firstly I need to check that if it is empty or not. So let's say user data, if not empty, it means the user exists. Otherwise inside this else block, let's say http response code, and let's say 404 echo JSON encode, and inside this array let's say status equal to 0, and inside this message I'm to put, let's say, invalid credentials. Now save all these changes for this else block. Now here it means we have some user data. So if we fetch about the name of the user, so it should be something user data, so user underscore data. And for the key, if we back to table, click on the TBL users and back to structure. So here if we have the key called name, email and the password, so it should be name. Again copy. So for the email address, so here we have email, and finally copy and paste, and this is for the password. So password, and let's say that we are making a variable with the name of password. Now we are going to use a password verify function of PHP. So this is password underscore verify. Now inside this we have to pass two parameters. The first parameter, it should be something called the data. So password, actually we are getting the password inside this because this is a password requesting, we are requesting via API. So it should be normal password because we are requesting. So copy that and pasting it here. So the first parameter is normal password, and the second parameter actually the comparing password, and also the comparing password should be a hashed password. So as we know that this password is basically we are getting from our database, and the database password column contains about the hashed password what we have saved while creating our users. So back to code. Now the second password we have something our, let's say, hashed password. So if we go inside this if block, so let's say HTTP response code and let's say 200, it means that echo JSON encode, and let's say inside this array we have to define, let's say, status equal to something one value, so it should be status. And finally inside this message key, let's say user logged in successfully, so user logged in successfully. Otherwise inside this else block, again if I go and copy all these details and pasting it here, it means that password is invalid. So inside the same case we are just writing about invalid credentials. So if we go at the top of this file and let's enable our debugger to find any error if we have done inside this file or not, so it should be display underscore errors and let's say 1 for the enable. So let's go ahead inside Postman, and firstly I'm to create a user, so create user API. Inside the body, the name I am passing here, let's say test user, and the email address is something test@gmail.com, and let's say password is something 1 to 8. Now if I press send button, now user has been created, as we can see message here. So back to our table, reload this page. Now we can find about the test user details inside this table. Now let's say that we're going to use our login API. So if I copy this URL, open a new tab via post request type, let's say the API name should be something login -API.php. if we check about the name, and this is the name. Now inside here via post request type we have to pass our email address and the password. So go inside headers and let's say content type, it should be something application and JSON. Go inside body raw and we are going to pass our email address, so let's email is something what we have made test@gmail.com, and the password we have made called password and is something from 1 to 8 value, and we are using a string value to pass our password, so inside double quotes. Now if I press send button by passing email address and the password, now as we can see that user logged in successfully, because all these details is now matching with our database data. So if we change about test underscore test, as we know that this user does not exist, so if we click on send button, so invalid credentials. Again if we make about the correct email address, but this time let's say password is invalid, again click on send button, now invalid credentials. Now inside this video session guys, successfully we have developed about login API method. Inside the next video we will see that how can we integrate about JWT concept inside this login API file. So inside this video session guys, if you have any doubt then please drop your comment. I will give my reply as soon as possible. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching and have a great day.